This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Mike Mostert. He combines a wide variety of instruments and tunings when constructing In Theory's music. Mike produces a sound where Muscle Shoals meets Los Angeles and together creates 100% pure rock. He's been a musician, a songwriter, and producer for years and has worked with the top-tier players such as Victor Wooten, Vinnie Appice, James Nichols, Eric Gals, Tommy Henriksen, Morgenstein and Johnny Hiland. He's proudly an official artist of the following brands: Gibson Guitars, Dunlop, MXR, Gogo Tuners, and Greenville Pick Ups. It's a pleasure to have you on, Mike.
Nice to be on this fine holiday.
Yes, yeah. Oh, it's so exciting to talk to you. You know, the reason why I wanted to have you on is because I know there's a new single dropping with your band In Theory, which we're going to get to in a little while. But, you know, in looking into your life, wow, you've really had kind of an interesting journey, you know, not just being a musician, but, you know, all of the creativity that you put together. So what was Mike like as a little kid?
You know, Mike was a shy little kid. Believe it or not, Mike's a shy little kid. But, you know, as far as doing music, I started was maybe like 5 years old. And my parents bought me a nylon classical, and they wanted me to play like Segovia at the time. And so I started with that, like the Mel Bay books and all that fun stuff. But really had to be around 11 years old, and I had to bring my brother into it. You know, my brother has passed on since, but he was 3 years older than me, and he was a bass player. So, you know, when you're 11 and they're 14, that age disparity is really wide. You know, you look up to him. The first few records he got me was Aerosmith Rocks, Angel, who we've been touring with on Earth as on Heaven, and I think Kiss Alive. So he's the one who got me into the rock. You know, every week he'd have some more rock stuff, and he would also let me jam with his band at the time, and I would mess up everything. And you know, it was his younger brother. They let me play, you know, Foghat or Black Sabbath, but you know, but he was really the one that got me thinking I could be a rock star guy. And then, you know, unfortunately, like he passed on when he was 30 years old, around that time, in a car accident. But yeah, and then from that, I ended up started playing clubs. I was playing out, you know, maybe like 15, 16, because back then in New York, you get your permit at 15, you get your license at 16. So I was able to play clubs at, you know, go to school. And at the time, I don't know, I still don't know how I did it. I was able to put my Marshall stack, which is Ibanez Destroyer, which is big case, and fit it in a Volkswagen Beetle. And I would go to my gigs that way.
What part of New York were you from?
I'm from Brentwood, New York. Good old Long Island.
Oh, you're out east, out in Suffolk County.
Yeah, forget about it. Hey.
Wow. Yeah, so VW Bug, we're going back. That's a very small vehicle. So to put all your gear in that, you know, I think the trunk was in the front in that vehicle, if I remember correctly.
But I fit everything in the back seat. I don't know how I did it. And, but right. Because, you know, the stuff would not fit in the trunk in the front. It would be too small.
Wow. So you mentioned your brother. You know, I find it interesting that he introduced you to the music concept. What was the musical interest of your parents? What was their style of music? Obviously not Kiss Alive, right?
No, you know, I have to say I had two major influences. You know, one is my parents, and then the other one is my aunt and uncle. And also, I actually can put a third one. There's a, you know, I've never mentioned the third one, but I actually should. But when my parents, remember, they had those old like record players that are like whatever, they're like furniture, right? You could fit 2,000 records in a thing, and it would take up half the room. But they listened to a lot of jazz and a lot of country. Like there was always music playing all the time, whether it's in the house or if I got to my parents' car, there was always music. And then like later on, then I found out like actually how hip they were at that time. You know, I go through their the record collection, when I go visit them, and I find like all these old records of like, like Jeff Beck and Les Paul and even like Zeppelin, and like I'm like, wow, you guys were listening to that stuff way back, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was always around. And then another major influence was my aunt and uncle in Princeton, New Jersey. They used to have like old reel trio, but they would have all these same thing, rare jazz, rare blues, rare stuff, and same thing with them, always music in the house. I would say the third one was my uncle, who passed away, I think, prior to me being born. And my aunt had predicted I would be born on the same day as him. And he was a famous musician in Holland. He actually wrote the marches for the Dutch Army. So actually, if you go to Amsterdam, there's a whole section dedicated to my uncle, who wrote all the music for the army.
That's incredibly interesting. Wow. That is really, really, I always say, like, when we look back at our lives and we really reflect, especially being a child, and we realize how far we've grown, but those early things that we have contact with really make an impact in our lives. What was the name of your first band, or how did you get involved with playing with others?
My first band, I still remember, it was a band called Ibex, IBEX. I don't know. I thought it was cool at the time. It was like this. It was like an antelope of some sort, and it's got like had these big antlers. When you're at the time, I was at 14, 15. We always had like the sign, and we're in Ibex. And, it was like secret handshake, secret sign. And then I would be the quiet kid, like I said, in high school, and I would write the logo on every desk I was in. I wasn't really paying attention. I was writing my band logo. So yeah, that was the first band.
So IBEX?
Uh-huh.
And what did it stand for? Was there anything that it stood for, or just initials?
No, it's an animal. It's some sort of it's some sort of antelope. Actually.
Oh, cool. So that's where the horn piece came in. Okay.
Right. That was right.
I get it too. Wow, that's incredible. When did you kind of move away from that band and start really feeling that you were going to take this in a different, more serious manner?
Well, I think the next few bands after that, there was a band called Battle Brat that I was in, and we had a European deal and toured Europe several times with that band. And I think after that, I was in with Chris Angel, the magician guy. I was with him. And then after that, I was in a band called Big Mouth with Tony Cavino, who's in at the area with me. And that band got signed to EMI, and we did that, the whole circuit. We did the hair metal circuit, had the big rock helmet, hair past the waist, but back then, music was done on cycles, right? So if you were in, like, disco had a 3 or 4 year period, and hair metal had that 3 or 4 year period, and just, punk, grunge. So we had gotten our record deal right on the last year of the hair metal, and then Nirvana came out, and that's it. It killed all the hair metal bands at that time. Everybody was losing their deals.
Yes, I've heard that doing many of these interviews about how the face of music changed because of the grunge scene. Starting the band with Tony Cavino and getting signed by EMI, what was the name of that band that you were in?
That was a band called Big Mouth, but with 2 G's, because back then, you needed 2 G's or 2 X's, in every band, you know how it is. But yeah, we had 2 G's because, extra big, but, if your band was called Rocks, you had 2 X's, or Rat, 2 T's.
Yes,
right?
exactly. So this would have been probably the late 80s, right? Was it around 1989 or 90?
No, early 90s, like 91, 92, around that time.
Wow. So what was the sound of Big Mouth? What was kind of like your memory of how your sound was?
Well, we had a little bit of it was always kind of hooky, but it was very always guitar driven, and definitely fit the 80s sound. That's the best way I can say it. We definitely sounded 80s, but we almost had a little bit of a grunge thing to us. As we were writing the record, I could tell there was some stuff creeping up, but definitely very 80s. Yeah, big guitar, big hooks, exactly what you think it would sound like.
So, as the grunge scene moved in and the big hair bands moved out, how did you redirect your path at that point?
Well, then, at that time, I was like, well, I really felt that I wasn't going to make it in the music world. So I just focused on the companies that I was working on, and I was able to launch several companies, three that became very successful. But because of one of the companies, and it's called Gogo Tuners, which I still run today, because of that company, it's a pedal tuner company. I make pedal tuners for musicians. And how that came about getting me back into music was, I used to do interviews, and I'd bring the artists with me as they were the artists and I was the CEO of the company. Nobody knew I played guitar at all, and nobody knew at all. And what happened is I saw one of my friends was playing up in New York, and I always make a joke. I said, I'm not sure if it was because it was 3 a.m, the Jack Daniels, or this gentleman and I never really had a deep conversation, but it caught me off guard. But anyway, at 3 a.m, he just comes up to me and he goes, "Are you still playing guitar? You still doing the music?" And I gave him the bull answer. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm still doing it." He got very serious. He's like, "Mike, you have to do it. This is, you got into this business, because of music. It's part of you. It's your soul. Like you have to do it." And like it just hit me really hard. And then I thought about it, but again, I was thinking more pragmatic ways, like a businessman. I was thinking, it would be really good for the musicians to know that I created the product as a musician for a musician. Like I felt I made a better mousetrap. I know what it's like to play on a festival stage or on a dark stage, and the problems you have with a pedal tuner. So I want them to. I thought it was very important messaging for them, not only to not only to think of me like the CEO or an entrepreneur or a bean counter, the guy with the lab coat, that actually there was thought of this as a musician for a musician. Because of that, I had another interview coming up that was going to be about 4 months out. As you know, like we plan these things way out in advance. And I really thought about it. And I said, well, if I'm going to play guitar, I want to be taken seriously as if I'm going to do it, I have to do it as a high level. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. Like it would have killed me to be like, oh, it's kind of cute. We're letting the CEO play. It's not how I wanted to be perceived. I think it would have taken the credibility away from me as a guitar player as well. So for 4 months straight at that time, I practiced maybe from midnight to about 3 or 4 in the morning for about almost 4 months straight. And then my first coming out was on Fox TV to about 20 million people playing guitar. And then I ended up talking about the product, but that was the first coming out. And then the next phase of that, then I would interview my artist, but I would do one song with that artist. And same thing, I always plan 30 days ahead. So again, my logic is if I practice one song for 30 days, I'll be pretty good at that song. So then that was the next evolution. And the evolution after that was I started getting invited by some of my, famous artists to, here I am playing, theater or arena and this with some famous folks. And yeah, might come and play with us. Like, all right, sounds. I'm like, sounds good to me. And then the next thing after that was, well, why not make myself a house band and invite my artists in? So I would do these events, on mainly in Nashville, and I'd be the house band. And then after that, I decided to do something that was not done I would say, in the music retail business at that time. Now there's a few companies that have done something similar, but at the time, I just decided to make an artist roster record with a lot of my artists. And initially, I was just going to take a little role, but with me, I can't do that as well. I like to, I don't know, I like to be hands-on. How's that? That's a nice way of putting it. But I ended up actually co-writing every song and producing every song, and I was there for every minute on that song. And I gave myself a target at that time to do it in 1 year. It took me 1 year and 3 days to do it, and I recorded in, let's see, Muscle Shoals, Virginia, Nashville, Philly, New York, Hollywood, LA, Ventura, Mexico, Phoenix, a few other places, just because I want to be in the room with the artists. I don't like, even though technology is so good these days, people mail tracks back and forth. but I want to see a reaction. I want to see the reaction to when I'm playing. I want to see a reaction when they're playing. And I think that's where the magic happens as a musician. Because, sometimes people don't even realize they'll smile if they're doing something. Are you doing something? They're shaking their head and like, ooh, that makes you play different because you're reacting. And then and this goes back and forth. And I think a lot of that magic gets lost these days because a lot of bands record in separate rooms and separate places at different times.
I think the Paris suggestion is pretty incredible because that one man's comment to you really kind of changed your direction and your whole path, not just your company and your Gogo Tuners, but also how you looked at yourself as a musician. It just sounds like you said, I have to kind of get serious and go back to my original passion. And you had that passion as a little boy, like you just talked about. So I find that really incredible. And the fact that you were being asked to be on Fox and play with all those people viewing you at home through their TVs. I mean, that's just pressure at a different level, It's not a one-night event. I didn't have a ticket. Everyone has a ticket when you're on TV, right?
Right, and you can't make a mistake, right? Because it lives forever. So
yes, well, being recording, that's true. Go back for me with the Gogo Tuners, though, because I'm not a musician, so I'm not familiar with the pedal, the machinery, the technology. How did you just decide I'm going to work on that? Because you mentioned you had two other companies. Were they all pieces of equipment for music, or was that the only music-related company?
Yeah, well, there's different things I did, but this probably has more related to do with I had created one of the largest independent music repping companies. So typically when you have a music rep company, it's geographically based, right? So if you're in LA, they give you LA, maybe Vegas. If you're in New York, you may get Long Island, New York, or New York, Manhattan, but it's a concentrated area because you have relationships in that area. And with that company, I just had so much success with that. And I think I'm just really sometimes too driven. I was able to handle, I think at the time it was like 15 different manufacturers, but I handled everything west of the Mississippi to Alaska, west of the Mississippi, Canada border to the Mexican border, Alaska and Hawaii. So I had this whole dealer base. So my logic at the time was, well, these manufacturers are willing to, not willing, but they pay me X amount of percentage to sell their product into these stores. Well, I think I'm going to make my own product. I have a dealer base. So it still took me a few years to decide what product I would do. And I took it upon myself. I was flying to Germany a lot. I was flying to China quite a bit. I think I went to Asia at least 15 times. Going to the factories, going to the trade shows, trying to decide what do I want to do. And then I finally decided, I want to do a tuner. Because as a musician, everybody needs a tuner. Everybody always breaks their tuner, and everybody loses their tuner. So it's a recession-proof type of product. So what I did is I went and I think I had purchased every single pedal tuner, every single clip-on tuner. And I just started working on things that I like and I don't like, whether it's looking at a peripheral vision, what's catching my eye. I have it dialed down to, reaction time of when you hit the note, how quick it reacts and I was timing it, and it's, anyway, so the first, product took me about 14 months to develop. But like I said, nobody taught me. I knew nothing about manufacturing. All I know is if you were to go, Shenzhen or Guangzhou, you just go for it, essentially. They drop you off in the middle of China and you can do it. And then I was trying to looking to manufacture in Germany, the same thing, but it ended up being better out of Shenzhen and Guangzhou for me.
That is just incredible to hear that. It takes a lot of, I always say, like, how much nerve do you have to step outside of your comfort zone, right? And it sounds like this was definitely out of your comfort zone, but you went with something that you could see a need for, but also something that you could test yourself, right? So it's definitely something that a musician could test. I mean, if you gave me one of those, I wouldn't know where to start, right? So it's definitely...
The cool thing with mine is, even though there's the internally it's complex, but as far as use, it's simple. So what I did is I made the largest pedal screen tuner. So I used to make a joke like you can see from the space station, but literally you can see from about 50 feet away. And most tuners they only give you like this much space to see if you're in tune. And then the other thing, I designed the screen and the lighting a lot for the day gigs. When I was telling earlier about the festivals, that's one of the biggest complaints is that you can't see the screen if you're playing in daylight. In mine, you can see it in the direct sunlight. You can see it. And for me, like one of the things for the company that really changed the company, and you mentioned his name earlier. His name is Johnny Hiland. He's one of the best like chicken picking guitar players in history, but he's also legally blind, and he was doing a rig rundown for Premier Guitar at the time. And I said, I wish I always, I always said, I wish I could have paid that guy to say what he did, but he's interviewing Johnny at the time. And Johnny goes, he goes, hey, I just want to stop the interview. I want to let everybody know it's 2 in the afternoon. It's direct sunlight. This is the interviewer telling the people watching. And I can see the screen. And Johnny has such a sense of humor about his blindness. He goes, I'm a blind man and I could see it. And that changed the course of Gogo right there, that interview.
That is perfect. Yeah. You make a lot of good points, though, because all of these things may seem minor, but all of those things are major. And if you're in the middle of doing a set, or like you said, you're on a big stage, you're in another place, maybe you're touring, and those festivals, the guys I know, I mean, they're out there and they're on and they're off, and there's so much movement. You need something that you could say, I'm going to rely on that. At least there's something that I'm going to have control over, right? Exactly.
Oh, and the tuning is everything. There's nothing worse than an out-of-tune musician.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Just talking about your company for a second, how did you come up with the name?
Ooh, that's a story too. I was trying to come up with the name. At the time, my ex-wife at the time, she was a musician as well, and she did like this '60s flight attendant type of thing, jazz thing that she was doing, and this is at the same time I was looking up names and stuff or coming up with a name, but she had asked me to find her go-go boots. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I like the name go-go, and to me it was also harkens like the late '60s. When you think about laughing, you got the go-go dancers, and I wanted to make it feel like it was retro. Like, we're known as like the orange tuner. So like even the casing you can't miss, right? So, but the orange, the Pantone is from when my dad used to restore cars. So it was from an orange 1967 Opel GT that he restored. So my orange is based after a 1967 Opel GT. So to me, it's just I think Gogo. I think '60s. I think so. That was that whole thing. It just seemed right for me.
Well, that's iconic, I think. It's iconic to the time because when you think of those colors, you think of race cars, they're always bright,
Exactly.
And they're always fast. And you were creating a product that you really want to rely on in a fast amount of time. So it all kind of went hand in hand. That's perfect. Right. Wow. Did you feel that you had to be engineeringly creative to make this product or going and making these trips? Did you find that those countries kind of had a model for how it's made, or did you feel like you needed to somehow create something or engineer something that's different than what was happening?
Oh no, I had to make something that was different. I didn't want to be the same as everybody else, and like I said, that's why it took. For every product that I did develop with Gogo, it took about 14 months per product because I wanted to get every little detail just right. But the Gogo and doing the Gogo record, now that's what led me to, in theory. Remember I said I was doing that roster record? So that's when I brought back, Tony Cavino from Big Mouth with the two G's, right? And we had the first incarnation of In Theory on that record. And that record, it was a very eclectic record. So it has pop jazz, it's got R&B, it's got blues, the theory on that record is a little bit more rock than what now. In theory, it's a little bit more bluesy-ish. Like I said, we're like a modern Zeppelin, or I call like Soundgarden meets Zeppelin. We get those comparisons a lot, or like a Rival Sons. But with that record, we were able to chart. I had four. It was either 4 or 5 songs charted all at the same time. So I was on the blues chart, the rock chart, the alt chart. So I'm like, oh, I think I got something here. I think I'm doing something right. And then Tony and I, spoke and said, well, let's continue with In Theory. And here we are almost, 7 years later from that time. And since then, we've been on a lot of TV. We've written for TV. We've been on, featured, let's say, like on Alice Cooper show, Sammy Hagar show, Ron Keel show, Eddie Trunks. And we were able to have two top 10 singles to where we're going now. We've been touring the last 3 years. So yeah, that's propelled In Theory.
Well, I'm very proud of you. That sounds really incredible. Tell me about Tony. Tell me what it's like to have him as a friend. Tell me what it's like to have him as a composer. Everybody comes with their own set of qualities and different things that you can add and kind of combine with each other.
Well, I mean, it's funny because Tony and I are very different people. Getting to the end result, we're quite different. But it's definitely like there's a brotherly relationship, so, or a family relationship, where you just drive each other crazy all the time. So you have that dynamic, because we are like brothers. We've known each other. I mean, how long now? 35 years we've known each other. But yeah, there's definitely, I'd say, a true family dynamic, how two brothers would fight and two brothers would stick up for each other and so forth. But as far as singing, I mean, Tony to me is definitely like one of the better, I have to say, the better newer singers out there, especially if you hear the last few singles we put out. People right away, they're thinking to get the Chris Cornell comparison is a pretty big thing to be compared to. And that's sort of his thing. It's like if you could actually put a Robert Plant and Chris Cornell into one person, that's him.
That is some heavy comparisons there. That's amazing. Good for Tony. That is really great. When you write together, how are you kind of collaborating in that process? Because you're living in different areas. Are you doing a lot of phone talk? Are you doing how is that happening?
No, there's a whole lot of that. Yeah, so typically, I write a lot of riffs. So like I do it in a very antiquated way. I hear a riff in my head and I save it to my phone. And I can look up I put it on the video mode and all you see is a black screen. I'm like, oh, I like that riff, and I'll just save it. And then once I think I have enough riffs or a riff that just really gets to me, I'm like, yeah, I think I got something. Then I typically will go into the studio in Muscle Shoals, which is about, my studio is about a mile away, and then start composing the drums, bass, guitar, start doing the arrangements. And then I send it to Tony, and, and we talk about it first, what we're looking to do. And then from there, he starts working on it. And then I'm always the producer of all the In Theory stuff. And then we just go like essentially line by line. Yeah, I mean, it's such a long process, but we go line by line, or the lyrics right, the melody right, or the dynamics right, and that's how we write. But it's such a tedious process for sure. A lot of times him and I also do it by FaceTime, or there's also this app called Audio Mover. So if he's singing, I can actually hear him in my studio through my speakers in real time.
That's great. That is really great. So it's like you're together.
Yeah, so it's like he's in the room, but he's not. But yeah, but you're getting the sound quality that you would if you were in the room. So you can give it instant feedback, and that's how we do a lot of stuff. That sometimes like he just hits it out of the ballpark, and as a producer, at least how I view my role is there's times to cheer people on. It's like being a good coach. Sometimes you have to let them do their thing. Sometimes you got to back off. Sometimes you have to micromanage. Sometimes you have to kick them in the ass. Sometimes I just have to shut up and trying to find a balance of all that. It's just like being a coach. Yeah, and I'm sure from being in the Army too.
Yeah.
Being a good leader, sometimes you have somebody in your ranks that you have to kick him in the butt, and sometimes they're doing the right things, or sometimes you want to push them further. They're doing something good. You're like, no, your good is good, but your good can be great. Let's make you great, and I feel that's my job.
Yeah, that's a tough place to be in, especially I think with songwriting, because I could see myself if I was writing songs really committed to certain lyrics, like I would really want to see it. Have you seen in all of your songwriting where you had to bail out on a set of lyrics or maybe a few sentences that were favorites, and then find that you found a song for those lyrics where you were able to compromise? Did you have anything like that? Because sometimes when I hear a song and there's a couple of lines in that lyrics that I'm like, oh, that's perfect. As a fan, we grab onto the lyrics. So do you have any kind of scenarios that were like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. It all depends. So say in theory, Tony writes the majority of the lyrics. And then what I do is there's a few things I do. I try to connect the thoughts, maybe a little bit more cohesive than he would. I think sometimes he likes to use words based on, whatever, like the note he's going to hit. If he feels it needs to end with an E or because of the vocal technique, sometimes he's singing a word that would, like that, instead of, let's just really get a cohesive thought. Let's we try to, so if I feel like it's going a little too far drifting, I'll just reel those in. And then, sometimes a lot of things like with the timings and, singing on the beats and a little bit behind the beat, singing all that stuff could change how you tell a lyric, how you tell a beat. So that's my job with that. I just fine tune it. But for the most part, like I said, Tony pretty much gives it a complete thing. And then I go and dissect it all. And okay, now maybe put this one here. That line's great. What do you mean? I'll ask him, what are you trying to say on this? Let's put that over here. Let's, and start doing it that way. But now outside of In Theory, when I'm producing stuff and writing other stuff, now in that case, I wrote all the lyrics myself. So that's a whole different animal.
So In Theory is a two-man project. So it's you and Tony. How do you fill in the rest of the band?
I look at In Theory like two different things. Like the studio In Theory, I think the way we write and produce, it's very much like how like a Steely Dan used to produce, where it's two, those core members, but they bring in all these mega giant players that fits the sound of that particular song. But live, it's different people except for the core guys, and that's how In Theory is. It's like for us, I mean, we've had obviously Tommy Henriksen from Hollywood Vampires, and Alice Cooper, and Eric Gales, and Terry Richardson from Stryper, like Rod Morgenstein, Vinnie Appice from Black Sabbath, and I always bring in one of the original Swamper guys on keyboards. If you know about Muscle Shoals, he's one of the guys that helped create Aretha Franklin and Etta James, and it's an R&B blues element that he brings in, but he's always in on everything. He's like a superstar genius guy. And then like what the song we just did with Eric Gales, obviously one of the best blues rock guitar players on the planet. And even with that one, I brought in Glenn Sobel, and he's the drummer for Hollywood Vampires and Alice Cooper, and I brought in the bass player from Jason Isbell. But yeah, it all really, what fits the song in the studio, and then we try to replicate it live. And then we have a core live band, and in a live band now we have, his name is Billy Thundersteel on drums, and then Rez Webster on bass. That's been our set lineup for this year out. And it's been great. This year has been, it's been great. I mean, the standing ovations and the turnouts has been really amazing for the band. So we've done, I think, 3 legs so far. Yeah. So that's
where have you been touring to? Like, we're only halfway through this year. So where have you played?
We did the entire the Northeast. It was one of our early runs. And I think before that, we did the Southeast, where I'm from. So we did Muscle Shoals, Nashville, Birmingham, Huntsville. And then we did the Midwest. So we're doing Indiana, Michigan, Ohio. So those are the 3 areas that we've hit so far.
Well, you have a lot of shows coming up, and you have a single that's dropping, and we're going to get to that shortly. But out of all of these hand-selected members that you've been able to kind of drop into your songs, do you have a wish list of musicians that you would like to reach out to in the future?
I call it, yeah, I have my bucket list of guys, and I'm trying to fit it in because, there's some of these guys may not work for in theory, but I'm trying to also, like I said, there's the bucket list, wish list guys, but I'm also conscious of, in theory has a certain sound as well. And will it fit? Will it not fit? And if it doesn't fit, it'll be on, I call it, the Mike Mostert bucket list record, when it comes out. And actually I already have a bunch of tracks that will probably, we're going to introduce the first single of that. You're the first one actually to hear about it, but I did a single. I've never released it, but that'll be the first one. And it's with Victor Wooten on bass and Rod Morgenstein from Winger. And the Dregs, he's the drummer on it. And I'm unsure if you know who Victor Wooten is, but he's one of the most, if you go into Rolling Stone, top 100
Oh,
bassists in
yeah,
history,
that's
Victor's
right.
always Victor's always number 3 or 4. So to have Victor and Rod on a couple of tracks is, I call it, it's the rhythm section that doesn't suck. That's for sure. It's hard to top that one. But I've been sitting on that since we finished it. I did some preliminary videos, and I ended up talking with our current record company. So right now we're distributed by Deco, but it's physically and digitally, our record is on Warner Brothers through the ADA label, but Deco handles all our admin for that. That will be the first one, and I thought the timing was right, just because when we put out the song with Eric Gales, and on that one again, like I said, it's an all-star lineup. It's Eric Gales, it's Jimbo Hart from Jason Isbell, it's Clayton Ivey, one of the Swamper guys, and then of course, Tony's vocals on that. If that doesn't give anybody chills, like that, his vocals, I've heard Tony sing for 25 years. That song still gives me chills. And of course, Eric. But that song, we debuted at number 70. And it's kind of like everything was against that song. It's a cover song. We did a Zeppelin cover. It's an 8-minute song, but we still cracked at the top 70. And then fast forward, now we're on to this next single, which I think we'll hear a little bit later, hopefully, right? And that's with Tommy Henriksen. Tommy, by the way, he's another Long Island, New York guy. We've known each other since remember I was talking about when I was playing, when I was 15. I was opening up for his band when I was 15. And then through the years, and we just reconnect, and then we reconnected recently. But he's also a band member of the Vampires, but he's produced so many people, from Lou Reed to Lady Gaga to, so many metal bands. But working with Tommy, we also get a lot of the Mutt Lange influence, because Mutt produced everything or co-produced everything with Tommy on his band Crossbone Scully. So you definitely hear this. You can say there's a little bit of Tommy influence, Def Leppard and Mutt Lange, but they're all the same to me. The way that their approach to producing, or in this case, we're co-producing. But yeah, that single to me still sounds like if you took Aerosmith and met Mutt Lange in 2025 and they had a baby. That's what this new song sounds like to me. But the reception on that's been amazing, and Alice Cooper fans have been amazing for us, and the Hollywood Vampire fans and the Johnny Depp fans and Tommy's fans, they've been all tremendous to supporting us and this cousin. We even brought in Tommy to be the bass player in the video, which is kind of funny because, with Alice Cooper, he's been with him the last 15 years, and he's the guitar player. But I still remember Tommy as the bass player for his band when I was 15 years old. And I said, Tommy, you want to be the bass player? And he's like, sure. And I have to say, I know this will Aaron, he has a lot of family still in New York, and this is what it's going to be on WNEW, right? I listened to that way back in the 102.7, but Tommy's family is still in New York. Tommy grew up in I think Center Reach or Port Jeff, and I grew up in Brentwood. And so I know a lot of his family will be, and fans will also hear this. We're 2 Long Island guys that made it out of Long Island. But yeah, he definitely pushed me real hard on this, and and we're really proud of how it came out. And but when people hear it, they'll definitely hear, like I said, there's definitely a Mutt Lange thing to it. And I think since we're on the subject too, I think it's kind of a little of a cool story about Alice Cooper. Now, Tommy's been part of Alice Cooper for quite a long time, about 15 years. but he's also a member of the Hollywood Vampires. So it's him, Joe Perry, Alice, and stuff. The funny thing with this is we've been featured on Alice's show. He's had a couple incarnations of the show, and Alice has been an in theory supporter without knowing that I know Tommy. He didn't have nothing because I didn't talk to Tommy for it's quite a long time since I saw him in person. But because of Alice, we were able to hit top 10 on the classic rock charts and on the active rock charts. So he's been a big supporter. And then finally, there was somebody who heard one of our songs, and I saw that they were an Alice fan. And I go, "Oh yeah," I said, "Yeah, I know Tommy, and tell Tommy hello." And then this person really wanted to connect Tommy and I, and it was their mission. And they tried for a year to connect us, and finally, I said, "I'll fly out to California." And I was at a hotel, and the funny thing was, I get contacted by the person. They're like, "Tommy's downstairs. I told him that you were here." So I ended up meeting Tommy at breakfast. It had to be almost like 18 years since the last time I saw him. So so we gave each other the big bear hug. It was great. But within maybe a half hour, we're like, we got to do something. And that started September. We got to do something. And then that night I went to see him play, and we talked a little bit again. Next morning we did breakfast again. And then the very next day, or that same night, I should say, Alice was doing a meet and greet. And usually, people pay what, $500 to $900 to do a meet and greet. And then, again, this person who really wanted to connect me with the Cooper people said, asked Tommy, "Hey, can I transfer my pass to Mike?" He goes, "No, don't worry about it. I'll get Mike a pass." So I'm in line. This person goes, "Hey, why don't you just go ahead of me?" And I go, "No." I said, "You know all these people. You've done pictures for Alice. You've done, you know the assistant. You know his personal photographer. You know his assistant." So I said, "No, we'll just go in together." So I walk in, and I really just want to thank Alice for supporting us for almost the last 3 years. He supported us, and this again, fate, or I don't know, what you would call fate, destiny. These things that occur, Now, Alice's personal assistant of 20 years, he's also the photographer for the meet and greets. So he grabs this person and he goes, "Is that Mike Mostert?" She goes, "Yeah, that's Mike." And, you could tell he was very emotional. He goes, "That's Mike." And he goes, "That's my old boss." So I was, his old boss I was his boss before Alice became his boss. And while I was talking to Alice, he starts going to Alice, "Mike." He goes, "Alice, that's my old boss." And Alice, he's always a sweet guy, very cordial. But now he had the biggest grin on his face. So he tells the guy, "Get in here, get a picture with your bosses." So it was good. So I got to reconnect with him. I got to reconnect with Tommy. And I was telling Alice about my project I was going to do with Tommy. And like I said, in my relationship with his assistant and stuff. And now the camps have become closer. Like I said, now when I needed a drummer to do the Eric Gales single before this other one, we got the drummer from the Vampires and Alice Cooper. And we just started doing another song, and I brought in the Alice Cooper drummer on that as well. So it comes full circle somehow.
It sure does. Wow, that story is just like, I always say things like that in life are kismet, like they're meant to be. And sometimes while they're happening, we think for minor reason. And then when we look back, we're like, well, it was for a major reason why we reconnected, And it's really incredible. Well, I am so glad that we've had the chance to have this talk today. And I'm so excited. We're going to be playing Retribution. So just tell the audience about the song we're going to be playing. And I want you to plug your social media and all ways to connect with you.
Sure. So this song is just not necessarily about getting revenge. It's about, people knocking you down, people not believing in you, and then you succeed regardless. And that's, you're getting your retribution. Some people equate it to revenge. I just equate it to like getting your own, like you did it in spite of the haters, the doubters, the people. I think, most people know this, I think while people want you to succeed, they equally don't want you to succeed. They're comfortable with you not succeeding. So that song is about overcoming that and and making it in life, regardless of what's happening. And and then for the social media, you just have to look for In Theory Original on Instagram. Also, Mike Mostert Official is my personal one, but it has so much In Theory stuff and then some, probably even more than the In Theory Original. And then on Facebook, it's just In Theory. And then on the website is intheoryoriginal.com. And I think that covers all our socials.
Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on. We're going to roll out with Retribution. Thank you again, Mike. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Same as you. Same as well. I think.
Thank you. You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Adele, professional psychic medium. Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.